Coming live from Oklahoma City is our guest this evening. Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Drake Scifershow, serial entrepreneur, and we learn from him how to build a business to sell. Welcome to the show, Drake.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So you see, you are right now, you have just recently sold your business and you are exploring what next. So what did you sell and what are you exploring? People will be listening to this because everybody wants to build a business that they can sell at a good price and they can retire to the Himalayas with all that money.
Yeah, so I had a wireless internet service provider. So we gave internet to homes and businesses in a small rural town just outside of Oklahoma City called Weatherford, Oklahoma. And I raised angel funding for that. I believe it was in 2017 with a partner that I had at the time. And then we built it out, scaled it, and then we actually sold it during COVID when we were having a ton of, we're actually growing really rapidly during that time. And so in order to take things to the next step, selling it just seemed to be the right thing to do for me, for my employees, and for the customer.
Right, Drake, right. You make it sound so easy. You know, you have been an entrepreneur since 16, since
Yes.
you were 16,
Mhm.
and you are a serial entrepreneur.
Mhm.
You have
Yes.
done so much, so many things, and so it for you it can be very easy the way you speak of it. For a lot of people who are in businesses, or even while they are doing something else or a job or something, everybody dreams to start something of their own.
Mhm.
And then here you're talking about not just building a business, but also selling it at a good
Mhm.
price. So first, Drake, is building a business so easy? And if people want to build a business to sell, then is it something different than building a normal business? Are there particular sectors that they should look at? I'm asking you so many questions at the same time so that you can answer at your own pace. So over to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I don't think that building a business is necessarily easy. I think it's in some ways easier than people think, and in other ways it's more difficult than people think. Um, I've had the benefit of experience of having done this a few times, and so that definitely helped me do things a little bit differently and a little bit better. With practice, you get better at things, and so I don't know that it's necessarily easy. I think the biggest thing when you're trying to build a business to sell is building it so that you're it's easy. A lot of people you'll try and build a business around you. And so you'll try and build a business so you can, the first hump is getting customers, making sure you have enough customers so you can put food on the table and start to have money to reinvest back into the business. But then a lot of people will start to build the business so that it makes their job easier instead of building it so that you're not needed in the business as much. And so building it so that anybody can do your job as the business owner, that's really what it comes to. Uh, that's really the best way to build it to sell. And that's what, if you talk to investment bankers, if you talk to anybody that's looking to buy businesses, that's what they're looking for is buying a business that runs as a business and buying instead of buying a business that runs because of the owner.
Okay, okay, Drake. People who start a business, generally there's a saying: follow your passion,
Mhm.
follow your heart, do something you like. And so there are two aspects of the business. One
Mhm.
is a business that you love, so don't know whether you want to like to sell it. And there is a business which is you don't like to do, you almost hate, but it's very profitable.
Yeah.
So let's start from a bit early than that. How does a person decide what business is something that he can take? and what is it that is it worthwhile, because it will take some time for that business to grow, scale up, and then it will be in a position to sell it. So
Mhm.
how can he be sure that it is saleable, it is worth it, and somebody would be interested to buy it? So how do you start doing from the idea itself, and then coming to the growing part of it? How do you get to that point when you have not done anything about it before?
Well, what I tell people, the best way to start a business is to try to find a problem to solve. The best businesses I find are not started with just random ideas. Usually they're started by solving a problem that people have. And so by starting, if you are able to solve someone's problem, then you've got a built-in customer right there. And so if you have a certain set of skills that allow you to solve a problem for a person in a meaningful way, then you're able to immediately have customers, immediately generate some cash flow. So that's when people are like, "Oh, I really want to start a business," like, great, just go to people you know who may be business owners or just may have they just ask them, hey, what are some problems you have? The easiest way to start a business is just go talk to business owners and say, hey, what are some problems that you're struggling with right now that if you had more time you would be fixing? And then if you just fix those problems and charge them for it, that'll work out. Um, in our case with the internet service provider, a lot of rural communities are dramatically underserved when it comes to internet access, and they are things are rapidly starting to close that gap where there are solutions in place, or the governments are starting to put stuff in place so that people can uh, have either subsidies to help build out internet service, or there are just more entrepreneurs who are seeing opportunities and just pouncing on them. Um, but so in the town that we were at, internet service was really, really poor, and so we established that by going door to door, and like I said, literally going and asking the people who would be customers, hey, is this actually a problem? If we were to come up with something, is this something you would be interested in? And so by doing door to door surveys across the town, that was where we were able to establish, yes, this is a problem, and we believe that we can fix that need and fill that need.
Okay, okay. So once you have zeroed in on an idea, and maybe it's something like about a solution. So apparently, it's a service that you are providing. Now, generally, we see that in a service sort of a business, in some time, other people also follow. If they see that this service is growing up and there is a demand for such a service, then you got other competitors.
Mhm.
Then the competitors start with competitive pricing, because they can afford to, especially if they have a backer, some some investor, venture fund coming into that place. Now, how do you exist during that time?
Yeah.
And if you are bootstrapping yourself or using your own funds, or you have not got funds from anywhere else, then how do you chart the path for yourself and for your business, that it becomes viable for you to run it, and then also becomes profitable enough for you when you sell it,
Mhm.
if at all there is anybody interested in your business by that time?
Yeah. So one, there's several things. One, a lot of people tend to think if there's competition, that is bad. Competition is actually a great thing, because a lot of times, especially if the players in your market or your competitors are very large, because if they're really large, usually there is some aspect of their business that they are overlooking. So in the case of where we were going, we actually had very intense competition against multi-billion-dollar companies. And actually, most of the time, they were, as you said, directly in a price war with us. Um, so, first off, when we first started the business, our main goal was to be the fastest provider. We had the highest advertised speeds at the lowest cost, for the speeds that you could get. We weren't trying to necessarily be the super cheap option. We were just trying to be the best option. And so when we went in, that was the case. That was true. And we built the first part of our business on that. But as uh, as we grew and as we started taking market share, several of the more established players started to increase their advertised speeds, which that's different than the actual speeds that you get. But they were advertising higher speeds, lower prices. And what became clear to me was that if you look at the way internet service is advertised and the way it's priced, usually they just put your megabytes per second and here's the price. But for 95% of people, they don't really know what those megabits per second mean. They just are using it as a false metric to try and compare packages. And so what I realized was that really all people wanted was they wanted to come home from work, they wanted to sit down on the couch, they wanted to turn on their television, and they wanted Netflix to work. And if Netflix didn't work, they wanted to be able to call somebody and have it fixed right then. Or if they didn't want to wait 3 hours on hold, or they wanted, if it couldn't be fixed right then and there, they wanted it to be fixed within 24 to 48 hours and have good communication on what's going on and how soon it's going to be resolved. And so once I realized that, I was like, oh, people don't actually know what they're buying. They're just doing the best they can with the limited information, limited understanding they have. So I retrained all of my agents. Here's how we're going to talk about the internet now. And here's how we're going to talk about our service. And our service was going to be focused mainly on customer service, to where you weren't on hold for any more than 10 to 15 minutes if you got on hold. We were fixing things within anything that was any sort of major outage was fixed within 48 hours. Anything that was small was fixed within 24 hours, if not same day. And we just had a really high level of service and handholding. And turns out that's what people really want. And people just want to sit down and they want to have it work. And so internet, some people joke, is kind of like oxygen and sex. You're only upset if you're not getting any. And so that's once I realized what people were actually buying, which was peace of mind about having their internet connection work, then I was able to reposition us in the market so that our messaging reflected that. And that is that, and having a well-built network that actually delivered on the promise of having very little downtime. I mean, we were doing things like adjusting our scheduled maintenance windows to before 4 a.m. So we were bringing the whole network down if we had to do anything, any maintenance. We were doing that well before anybody was awake. And so it's amazing that more companies don't do that, but they'll just take the whole thing down in the middle of the day. And that's, everybody doesn't precisely remember when stuff goes down, but emotionally they start to just get this subconscious sense that it goes down, it goes down, it goes down. Well, if you can prevent that, then you are just creating a consistent separation between you and the competition. And so that, as far as that's kind of just the layout of how internet landscape works. But for anybody who's looking to start a business, if you look at competition, well, kind of how I just laid out, it doesn't necessarily mean that competition is a bad thing. It just means that you need to select your messaging and try as best you can to really understand what the customer actually wants. Because at the end of the day, they want the result. They don't really care that much about the mechanisms that you use to get them there. They just want it to be easy and effortless on their part.
Right, right, Drake. Now, when you know that you are going to build a business that you have to sell, then what is the time horizon that they should keep in mind, or they should fix for that? Some people, almost everybody would like to build tonight, sell tomorrow, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, from a serial entrepreneur, what's the advice on this?
I think for most people, well, so first of all, it depends on where you're at. Obviously, you want a business that is, the best businesses, are healthy, they're profitable, and they're growing. And so, if your business fits those categories, then usually, depending on what you want for it and how realistic your expectations are, I would say you would start preparing for it 1 to 2 years, over 1 to 2 years. And that's if you haven't done anything. Now, if your business is already built up pretty well, you've got a good leadership team, you may be able to push that along faster. But generally, that's what I would expect. Typically, what happens, uh, what I've seen, and what we did was, early on, the business was very, very heavily dependent on me, and I needed to build it to where I had employees who were well trained in everything, and I wasn't the bottleneck in my employees getting anything done. And so that if you take Drake and put John in Drake's place, for the most part, the business will run pretty well without me. Or if I was selling to a larger company, then they would be able to put, let's say, a regional manager in place and be able to just continue on operations. One big thing is deciding. Uh, One big thing is deciding who your buyer is and who to target. So I knew that my buyer was more than likely going to be a company that was bigger than me. And so I'm trying to think through what are the things that are going to be important to them when they take over the business, that if I can get ahead of what they're trying to do and put those in place in my business to where it makes their process after acquisition easier, then that's going to make my business more attractive to them. And so it's understanding, are you selling to someone who is about your same size? Are you selling to someone who's much bigger than you? Are you selling to someone who is in your industry, who would be called a strategic buyer? Or are you selling to someone who's only going to be looking at the financial metrics of your business, who's a financial buyer, which would be like private equity or something like that? And so when you understand that, it changes the way that you position your business to be an attractive asset for them to pursue. In my case, we had several. The government was doing a massive giveaway to help build out internet in a rural area, and so I looked and I saw that there were 4 people that won funding in my area, and so I figured out, well, I just went and found a way to talk to the owner or the person who'd be responsible for the acquisition, at all of them, and said, hey, if I were you, I would want to buy this rather than just build it from scratch. And two, if you buy me, you don't have to compete with me. And here are all the ways that I would compete with you if you were to come in. Oh, and by the way, I know this is a multi-state expansion for you, and it's unlikely that you're going to find someone who is like me, who understands all these things, to help you continue to build it out. So I knew that they were going to want me to stay on and work for them for a little bit longer. But that was uh, one of the carrots that you dangled out there, and so it would ease their ability to hire. It would give them boots on the ground that was familiar with the market. And so all of those things to say, that's just extra detail in how you would think through what your acquirer might want in something that they were buying, and then building your business and positioning it for that type of exit.
Right, Drake. Right. Now, in terms of when you start a business,
Mhm.
uh, how much should one uh, invest their own money, put their own money into the business if they have it? If you don't, then there is no other option but going to the banks or investors. But if you have, then what's your advice? How much they should put? Or they should put 100%, 30%, 10%, or just what's your advice on this?
Oh, I think that the best way to grow any business is to try to put as much of your money in as you can, because that will help you. So I've done it different ways. I've put my own money into the business, and then I've also raised money. And looking at the two options, your best bet is to do everything you can to get as far along as you can using your own money, because money is the type of thing to where it's like an accelerant. It can get you where you're going a lot faster if you go and raise more of it. But if you're going in the wrong direction, it can put you off a cliff really quickly. So uh, I always tell people to do what you can to try and get some level of establishment, especially if you're new to the industry. So let's say if you're in my industry, or internet service provider, There is equipment that you can get, especially with wireless equipment like we had, um, where you can establish a business for relatively cheap, and you can start to collect cash flow. You start to learn more about some of the things that some of the problems you may run into, and then you're able to iterate on that. And then if you do go raise capital, you're able to supercharge your growth instead of the ups and downs associated with the businesses as it starts. So I tend to recommend people put as much of their own money as they can, because it will be easier to raise money once you have a business that's functioning.
Okay. Okay. And when do you go to a bank or investor? How do you decide whether bank will be good for you or to go to a venture capital or some sort of an investor or a partner, whoever it is? How do you decide who should they prefer and why?
I think usually they, to a certain extent, will self-select for you. Banks typically will not loan on unless you're doing some sort of SBA, which is an American program for small businesses. But unless you have that, usually banks are looking for an asset that they can finance. So that would be like a piece of land, a house, a building, or like an apartment complex. Most banks are doing real estate. Primarily, or some sort of asset that they can collateralize and then resell that secures the loan. Whereas VCs and angel investors are usually more apt to focus on funding something that is more an idea, more that is less tangible, and that's usually how they go. If you can find a bank that'll finance your idea, then great. But usually the different types of lenders have their own type of asset that they look to loan on.
Right, right, Rick. And during this part, all this process, who is your best advisor at this point in time? Are you your own best advisor, or you look for an advisor who can handhold you during all these processes?
I was really blessed. I had my investor had sold his company. He had a startup and he had sold it for $1.5 billion. And he and I were doing weekly calls where he would just drop all sorts of wisdom and give me advice and helping me be a sounding board and really give me wisdom and how to navigate everything that was going on. And so if you have someone like that can, someone who's already done this before, somebody uh, who's already built something, who's already scaled something, anytime you can do that, you're going to have a much better time with it. So if you can find that, go for it. That's a super important thing. And a lot of times, most businessmen love to love to pass down their wisdom and love to share and love to help the next generation avoid some of the pitfalls that they may have gotten into. And so I think that if you are if you are diligent and if you can provide value to the relationship for them, then I think there are plenty of people that are more than willing to help out.
Okay. Okay. Now, about the valuation part,
Mhm.
how do you create value for your business? Should you just wait that there is a business growth, business scale up, or you create valuation through uh, getting other parties involved, investors, venture funds, venture capital? How do you do that? Because if they put money, then it goes exponentially, it rises, and you start also selling bit by bit, and you are getting some money at the initial stage itself, if it is worthy of that from their perspective. How do you uh, explain that from your perspective?
Well, I think it depends on what type of business. what type of business you're growing, how much of it. Typically, when people are raising really large chunks of money, they're trying to go after very big sections of the market. They're trying to become the dominant player and capture market share. They care more about being the elephant in the room than they care about profitability right off the bat. So you've seen this tons in tech where Uber wants to be the main ride sharing app, and so they're going to do everything they can to capture customers at, even if they're losing money on every customer, just so that they have those customers and those customers are used to using Uber. The way our model works with being an internet service provider, I wasn't going to be able to do that because of the geographic restrictions that we had, um, and I also didn't. I knew what was coming down the road. So we were a wireless internet service provider, and most places were starting to go to fiber, and I knew that was happening. And I had my head on a swivel and was looking at that and thought, I either need to sell this and sell this to someone who wants to do fiber in our area, or I need to go raise $2 to $5 million to go build it out myself and capture the market. And when I was looking at that, when I was looking at what it would take from the business and from me, it just made more sense to sell it to someone who wanted to take on that risk, take on that burden, someone who would have more expertise. Like, I didn't have a background in having an internet service provider. I had an entrepreneurial background, but I had not had a background doing telecommunications. And so I thought it would be better for our customers and for our employees if I were to sell to somebody who was positioned to put fiber in the ground.
Right, Drake. Now, during this time, when you are trying to build a business that you want to sell, then where is the customer in between? How much do you focus on the customer service experience, on the customers, as well as on the exit part of? How do you balance that out? And what then customer experience or customer service means to you or should mean to you during this whole process?
Well, I would say internet service is one of the most intense customer experience. One of the most customer experience really matters with
Right.
internet service provider,
Either
because
the experience is or they don't.
yeah, and I mean most of us know either from personal experience or we have friends who. When they talk about their internet service provider, they don't speak kindly of them. Um, so that was the big thing that we were trying to focus on, because and where it matters for the potential acquirer is looking at what's called churn, is how many customers are you losing every month, versus, so you have your growth trajectory, and how many customers are you losing every month that affects that growth trajectory. And so if they look at you and say, oh, you're growing really quickly, but you're also, losing just as many customers out the back end, well, then you're going to be spending way too much money on marketing trying to acquire new customers, because you can't keep the ones you have. And so if you can provide a good customer experience, you're able to reduce your churn rate. And by having lower churn, that business becomes much more attractive to potential acquirers, because they can tell that there are not any big underlying issues, major red flags with the business that they're getting ready to buy. And so for us, kind of like I alluded to earlier, what that meant was focusing on what the customer really wanted, which was, they didn't want to be, our major competitor in the space. They would have 3-4 hour hold times only to get hung up on at the end of as soon as they get on the line with someone, and then they have to call back again, and those kinds of things just frustrate people. And so for us, being able to talk to a real person, not have to go through a million prompts, only to have someone that you talk to who doesn't know really what could be the issue. They don't understand the product. they don't understand the service, and they don't understand who the person is and what they want. Um, and so for us, that meant having local agents who lived in the same town, who were also using the same internet, who were actually customers as well, and who could explain to someone, um, how the different ins and outs of the internet work, besides just the typical IT guy who, answers phones like, hello, have you turned it on and turned it off again? Just to do that. And so offering a better level of customer service when you have outages, because it's not if you're going to have outages, it's when. And so how do we deal with times of crisis, and how do we keep people updated and informed so that most of disappointment comes from a mismatch of expectations and reality. And so the more we can align our customers' expectations to the reality of what they're going to get, the better the experience is for everybody. And to do that while making the whole process as frictionless as possible, to where it's just easy for people to participate in.
Right, Drake. Now, talking of scaling up the business, uh, how does one do that? Because everybody is not Drake. You have been a entrepreneur since 16,
Mhm.
from your teens. You know about advertising. You have worked there. Digital media, real estate, private equity, telecommunications. You have a finance degree also. So you got almost everything that is needed at every aspect of a business. But everybody may not have, so many, uh, so many qualities or qualifications. So how do they scale up, and how do they know when to push things on the advertising side, marketing side, sales side, customer side, reference side? I don't know which side, or the financial side. How do you do that?
Well, I think first is focusing on your product, making sure that you have a good product that people want. And when you have a good product that people want, then that solves a lot of your issues, because I can throw a ton of marketing dollars at a really bad product and still bring people in, but you'll get a high churn rate where people will, you know, run out the back door as soon as they see what you have. So the first thing is doing what you can to refine the product. Once you have a product that people like, then it's just a matter of exposure and trying to get it in front of as many people as possible. And so, the first thing, make sure you have a business that functions well and a product that works. Then you can start to add marketing dollars, and adding the marketing dollars will create cash flow. Once you have cash flow, now you have to identify, how big can my business actually get, with what are the milestones, where am I trying to go with it. And that will help you. uh, then you can kind of reverse engineer and go, okay, well, if I have 1,000 customers right now, I want to get to 10,000. What are the steps that I need to take, as far as how well is my marketing working, how quickly am I able to acquire customers, you know looking at, and it really depends, like I said, on what kind of business it is. Whether it's, we were a service based business, but we had a lot of hard costs associated with the customer. And so for us to break even on a customer, it took 7 months. So as soon as the customer comes on board, I'm having to spend money to get that customer, and then we'll wait 7 months for that customer to be profitable. Pardon me. With Sorry. Um, and so if you have that in place, you have to know, I have my marketing cost and I have to put money towards that, but I have to make sure I don't spend all my money on marketing, because I have to be able to bring the customer on board too. A lot of times for people, that's just knowing your numbers and actually looking at your financials and breaking that down and trying to understand it as best you can, to see how long does it take before I'm actually making money off of my customers. Those types of numbers, once you have that, then once you have all those knobs and dials adjusted, then you just are doing everything you can to reinvest the cash flow and take the money that you're bringing in and put it into your customer acquisition marketing.
Right, Rick. Right. So now a business is built. It's been a few years. The business is running good enough, and it's time for you to sell. So how does one start with that process? Should they start putting up a big sign outside their office, business for sale, or how do they start doing that?
Usually, I would not put up a big sign. That might freak out some of your customers, because they don't know any of the reasoning behind that. But what I always look at is who would this be most attractive to, and that's where, as an owner, you kind of have to have your head on a swivel. Looking at the market, looking around, saying, "Hey, where are the winds blowing? What's happening in this space?" And so in my space, I knew that I wasn't big enough to attract a financial buyer. So I didn't think anybody from private equity was going to come in and try and purchase me. But I did think that I made a lot of strategic sense to one of the larger players in the industry to come in if they were looking to expand into the market. And so that's a key thing, is just being able to identify that. If you can identify who your possible buyer might be, that helps you kind of narrow some stuff down. And in some cases, it might be somebody who's not yet a competitor. In some cases, it might be somebody who is a competitor. I tried to buy both of my other wireless competitors in town several times. They had a different cost structure than I was, and it wasn't going to be. It wouldn't have worked out for them in the long term the way they wanted it to, and so they didn't do it. But it would have been, I would have been open to selling to them as well, because we covered the same area, and if we could have both covered each other's territory, if one of the purchases had been made, if you have a map, up there, and it overlays really well, then you can have the same service technicians covering the same area, and it doesn't add too much difficulty. And so that would have worked really well if we'd been able to merge. So in some case, your competitor might be your best buyer. In my case, it was somebody who was coming into town who would have been a competitor, but I just managed to get there before they did and make something attractive enough to them. So I think that's really it, is figuring out who could be a buyer and what would be most attractive to them, and then just going and talking to them and opening a conversation. Be like, hey, is this something that you're interested in possibly buying, or would you be interested in possibly selling to me? That's just an easy question, because it just opens up the dialogue. I mean, my best friend, he had a business and he bought 5 companies because just a conversation opened up, and it allowed him to grow really quickly. So for some people, they might not necessarily be thinking about growing through purchasing you, and because they might not think it's an option. But if you let them know it's an option, then you actually have something to work with.
Right, right, Rick. So, who does the talking? Is it you yourself? One himself does the talking, or they get some representative, some legal firm or some investment firm, bank or something. Who does this? Who represents you?
Well,
Because
I
there
think
is the valuation also. You got to make sure that you are getting the right amount of money.
Yes, yes. So it really depends on the size of your business. So I did everything myself. I had a lawyer write up the contract,
Okay.
but I was very involved in uh, the contract negotiation. I handled the negotiations myself. I had, like you mentioned before, I kind of have worked in a lot of different situations, and so I'm a bit more adept at doing those types of things than maybe the average business owner. But there are plenty of times where having representation, a business broker or an investment banker, to kind of walk you through the process, that is something that can be very valuable, especially if you don't feel like you have the adequate skill set to do it. Um, and they may also be able to help you get your business ready and give you kind of a third party opinion on what it might take and what things you might have to change in your business to make it more attractive to a buyer. And so generally that's the best route to go for people. um, and for me, the business, I just knew at our size it probably wouldn't make sense. So there's this really great podcast called Built to Sell, and I listened to probably a couple hundred episodes on that, just listening to stories of business owners selling their companies, the pretty stories, the ugly stories, the details of what went well, what didn't go well, and I used a lot of that information plus what I already knew to try to position myself well so that I felt comfortable negotiating. But in some businesses, so like my business, you mentioned the valuation. Our business, internet service providers, are um, mainly valued based on the type of the equipment that they're using and how new or how in date or out of date that equipment is, and then also on the total amount of sales, so gross sales. And usually you'll see anything from um, zero point 0.7 times 1 year of gross sales all the way up to 1.3 times gross sales. So if you're making 100,000 a year, then the business will sell for anywhere from 70,000 to 130,000. And because I knew that, we had really up to date equipment and we had a lot of capacity in the business. And so that allowed us to trade for 1.3 times our gross revenue. And um, that allowed us to get the top end of the multiple. And the company, we grew, let's see, we had grown 50% that year because of the increased internet traffic and high customer demand during the 2020 lockdowns during COVID. But then after we sold, they grew another 30% of the whole business without any major capital expenditures because it had been built with enough capacity for anybody who was acquiring it to continue to grow it.
Right, right, right. Now, my last question to you on this is that should the entrepreneur or business person be ready with this idea that there may not be any buyers of his business when he is trying to sell it?
Yeah, I think it's always something that's important to. It's important to build a healthy business, and whether you are going to sell it or whether you're going to keep it or whether you have to keep it, the best business is a healthy business. And a lot of the
Right,
same things. If anybody gets into the research of, you know, positioning a business to sell, the good news is if you go down that path, what you're really doing is just building a healthy business
right,
that isn't 100% relying on you. And so that's the right way to go anyway, even if you don't have someone at the end of the road who can buy it. At the end, you'll more than likely have a more profitable business. You'll have a business that is easier for you to run. It's easier for you to have a family while having your business. And so I don't think that's not something to worry about. And I think that uh, yeah, I think it's not something to really worry about because ultimately your business will be better for going through the process.
right, Drake, right. You have very nicely taken us through this whole journey of, you know, from the idea to the selling, and also if there are no buyers for it, the best option is to look at always establishing or building a healthy business, because that will always have takers. So if at this juncture when you have just, you know, exploring what's next, if people want to connect with you on any business idea or want to take your help, or, you
Mhm.
know, just to know more from you, how do they do that?
I would say the best place if they wanted to connect with me on LinkedIn. At LinkedIn, it's just my name, Drake Scifershow, like you have it on the screen. Or if they're looking, I'm going to be putting out content that's helpful for people who are looking to start a business or even have a business. And you can find that it's Instagram, and then my handle is thedrake.tv. And it's that handle on Instagram and on TikTok, where I'll be putting out bite-sized content to help people and just try and add value to anybody that owns a business or is looking to get started in a business.
Right, right. On this note, Trek, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.